It is January of 1962, and the Fortune magazine on the newsstands carries a number that has never appeared in American business before: $425 million. By some accounting, 470. It is the largest single product loss in the history of American corporate enterprise, larger than the Edsel, the famous Ford catastrophe that had become shorthand for failure, and the Edsel had cost only about $200 million. This loss is more than double it, and it belongs to General Dynamics, the largest defense contractor in the United States, and it comes from one source: not a missile, not a bomber, not a submarine, an airliner. A beautiful, gleaming, record-breaking jetliner that was the fastest passenger aircraft in the sky and that almost no airline wanted to buy. The airplane is the Convair 880 and its stretched sister, the Convair 990, and together they very nearly sink one of the most powerful industrial corporations in the country. Convair builds 65 of the first and 37 of the second, and writes off more money per airplane than the airplane sold for, and the division that built them. The proud San Diego company that had made the flying boats that patrolled 2 oceans, and the bomber that helped win the Second World War, and the rocket that carried the first Americans toward orbit, never designs a commercial airliner again. The name survives for another 3 decades as a maker of fuselages and rocket stages, a subcontractor building pieces of other companies' machines, until in the middle of the 1990s it is sold off in parts and shut down entirely. And the city of San Diego, which had built airplanes for 60 years and once employed 18,000 people in this one company, builds airplanes no more. To understand how a company this good destroyed itself by building an airplane, this good, you have to go back to a man born in the Washington Territory in the last years of the frontier, an Army aviator turned industrialist who built his empire on a single, uncompromising idea. The idea was a slogan he had stamped into the culture of his company, 4 words that meant the machine must be excellent before it is anything else. Nothing short of right is right. Reuben Hollis Fleet is born on March 6, 1887 in Montesano, Washington, into a prosperous family that loses almost everything in the financial panic of 1893, so that the boy grows up watching security vanish overnight and learning that the only thing a man truly owns is what he can build and prove. He goes to a military academy, edits the cadet newspaper, serves in the National Guard. When the United States edges toward the First World War, he reports to the Army's new aviation section and learns to fly. And in May of 1918, he is the officer placed in charge of inaugural airmail service, putting Army planes and pilots into the first scheduled mail flights between Washington and New York. He is present, in other words, at the literal beginning of practical aviation in America, and he never leaves it. He leaves the Army in 1922, takes over a struggling aircraft firm, and on May 29, 1923, founds the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. He's 36 years old. From the beginning, Fleet builds his company around engineering excellence and the kind of demanding standards that win government contracts. He hires a brilliant designer of heavy aircraft and goes after the hardest, most technically exacting work in aviation. Consolidated's first products are military trainers, the airplanes that teach a generation of pilots to fly, and they are good enough that within a few years Congress is investigating the company for earning excess profits, the price of building something the government cannot do without. But the work that makes Consolidated legendary is the flying boat, the large multi-engined seaplane that can patrol the oceans, and Fleet's company becomes the master of it. The line of patrol boats culminates in the PBY Catalina, one of the most versatile and widely produced aircraft of its era, a seaplane of extraordinary range and payload that will serve across both the Pacific and the Atlantic in the war to come, hunting submarines, rescuing downed airmen, scouting fleets. In 1935, Fleet moves the entire company from Buffalo, New York to San Diego, California, drawn by the mild climate ideal for testing seaplanes and by a city that rolls out the welcome mat so eagerly that 30,000 residents flock to the airport for the grand opening of his new plant. San Diego and Consolidated fuse into a single identity, and for the next 60 years the company will be, apart from the Navy itself, the largest employer in the county. Then comes the Second World War, and the company's defining machine, the B-24 Liberator, a four-engined heavy bomber built in numbers almost beyond comprehension. To build it, Fleet's company and its partners create an industrial machine of staggering scale. Plants in San Diego and Fort Worth and Tulsa and elsewhere, tens of thousands of workers, 40% of them women, turning out more heavy four-engine bombers than any other manufacturer in the country. The slogan is everywhere in these plants. Nothing short of right is right. It is a statement about workmanship, about the conviction that an airplane carrying 10 men into flak over Germany cannot be approximately correct, that it must be exactly correct, that the engineering and the building must be held to a standard with no tolerance for good enough. But Fleet himself is already gone from the company by the time the Liberators reach their peak. In November of 1941, frustrated with the government, the tax laws, and the Navy, he sells his controlling stake. And in 1943, his company merges with Vultee Aircraft to form the Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Corporation. The name soon contracted in common speech to Convair. The founder has cashed out, but the principle he stamped into the company outlives his departure, because the men who run Convair through the war and after it are engineers who believe, as Fleet believed, that the machine must be supremely good, that excellence is the product. For more than a decade, that conviction keeps producing triumphs, and the triumphs grow more ambitious and more expensive, and further from anything resembling a cautious business. Convair emerges from the war as a giant, ranked fourth among all American corporations by the value of its wartime production contracts, ahead of Douglas and Boeing and Lockheed, and it pours its engineering culture into the new age of jets and rockets with spectacular results. It becomes a pioneer of the Delta Wing, the swept, triangular shape that makes high-speed flight possible, and builds a series of machines that push the very edge of the possible. There is the B-36 Peacemaker, an intercontinental bomber so enormous it can fly from the United States to any target on Earth and return, the airplane that carries American deterrence in the first years of the Cold War. There is the B-58 Hustler, the first bomber capable of flying at twice the speed of sound, a delta-winged dagger that is as much a technical statement as a weapon. There are the Interceptors, the F-102 Delta Dagger, and the F-106 Delta Dart, fighters built to climb and kill at supersonic speed. And there is the work that reaches beyond the atmosphere entirely. The Atlas, the first American intercontinental ballistic missile, a rocket of such delicate brilliance that its skin is a stainless steel balloon too thin to stand up on its own without internal pressure. And that same Atlas, adapted, becomes the launch vehicle that carries the first American astronauts into orbit in Project Mercury. John Glenn riding a Convair rocket around the Earth in 1962. The B-36 is a machine of almost absurd scale, a bomber with 6 propeller engines later supplemented by 4 jets, a wingspan wider than the Wright brothers' first flight was long, crewed by more than a dozen men on missions that can last more than a day. The B-58, by contrast, is all knife-edged speed, a delta-winged bomber that flies at Mach 2 and looks, even sitting on the ramp, like something that has arrived from a later decade. By the mid-1950s, Convair is building the bomber that rules the high cold sky, the fighter that guards the continent, and the rocket that opens space. And it is doing all of it on the founding conviction that the most technically formidable machine is the one worth building. In 1953 and 1954, the company is acquired by General Dynamics, a conglomerate assembling military and high-technology businesses under one roof, and Convair becomes its largest and most glamorous division. And it is here at the summit that the founding principle becomes the instrument of catastrophe, because Convair looks at the dawning age of commercial jet travel and decides to enter it the only way it knows how, by building not the most economical jetliner, not the cheapest to operate, not the one the airlines can most easily afford, but the best defined the way an engineer who reveres performance defines best. The fastest, while Boeing prepares its 707 and Douglas its DC-8, big four-engine jets sized to carry as many passengers as cheaply as possible across oceans and continents, Convair sets out to build something smaller and faster, a jet that will beat them not on cost per seat, but on raw speed, on getting there first, on the pure engineering glory of being the quickest thing in the sky. It is the slogan applied to the wrong question. Nothing short of right is right, and right to Convair means fastest. The market is about to inform them that right means something else entirely. The airplane begins life under romantic names: the Skylark, the Golden Arrow, then the Convair 600 for its intended top speed, and finally the Convair 8080, a number derived from 880 feet per second, roughly 600 miles an hour, the speed meant to announce its entire reason for existing. And it has a patron, which is both its making and its undoing. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire who controls Trans World Airlines, wants his airline to fly the fastest commercial jet in the world, and he throws himself into the program with the obsessive, secretive, increasingly erratic intensity that defines his later life. Hughes commits TWA to a large order and shapes the airplane to his desires, and his involvement lends the program glamour and a launch customer. But it also entangles Convair in the chaos of Hughes's deteriorating finances and judgment, the delays, the secrecy, the sudden reversals. The 880 that emerges is genuinely the fastest jet transport in the world, cruising faster than the 707 or the DC-8, a sleek 5-abreast machine powered by 4 General Electric engines derived from a military jet. It enters service with Delta Airlines in May of 1960, and on raw performance it delivers everything promised. But the market does not buy speed. The market buys economics, and on economics, the 880 is a disaster. Its 5-abreast cabin carries fewer passengers than the 6-abreast Boeing and Douglas jets, so its cost per seat is higher. Its military-derived engines burn more fuel, and when Boeing sees Convair coming, it simply produces the 720, a lightly modified, cheaper version of the 707 that does nearly the same job and can be sold at a lower price because it shares the parts in the production line of an airplane Boeing is already building by the hundred. Convair has spent a fortune developing an all-new airplane from scratch. Boeing has answered it by trimming an existing one. The orders do not come. And then Convair makes the decision that turns a failure into a catastrophe because it tries to fix the problem with more of the same medicine. American Airlines, whose chief wants a jet fast enough to beat his rivals coast to coast, will buy a Convair jet if it can be made faster still, guaranteed to cross the country 45 minutes quicker than the competition. Convair agrees and builds essentially a new airplane, the Convair 990, stretched and modified and pushed for still more speed. And the radical extent of the changes is not made fully clear to the General Dynamics board that is approving the money. The 990's troubles begin on its first test flights. It cannot meet its speed and fuel guarantees. To chase the speed, it must gulp fuel. To fix the aerodynamics, Convair must bolt strange bulges onto the wings, and a hump onto the fuselage. The airplane that was supposed to rescue the program deepens the hole, and the hole is already the deepest in the history of American business. The numbers that result are almost incomprehensible for their era. Only 65 Convair 880s are built before the line shuts down, and only 37 of the 990, a combined production of barely 100 airplanes against development costs that ran into the hundreds of millions. General Dynamics writes off something on the order of $425 million. By some estimates, closer to 470 or even $500 million in the dollars of the early 1960s. More than $4 million lost on every single airplane built, a figure larger than what the airplane sold for. Time magazine calls it the biggest single product loss in United States corporate history. The company that had been the largest defense contractor in the nation is forced to take a prudential loan of $135 million on terms so severe that shareholders cannot be paid dividends until the past losses are made up out of future earnings. General Dynamics, the Colossus, is brought to the edge by an airliner. And the final blow to any hope of recovery comes from the competition's relentless logic. In 1959, Boeing announces the 727, a three-engined jet that can do nearly the work of a four-engined airplane at lower cost. And the writing on the wall becomes unmistakable. The market is moving decisively and permanently toward economics, toward cost per seat, toward fuel burned per passenger mile, toward the boring arithmetic of what it costs an airline to fly a human being from one city to another. Speed, the thing Convair had bet everything on, the purest expression of its engineering soul, is worth nothing if the airplane loses money on every flight. The five-abreast cabin that had felt like an elegant engineering choice now reads as a commercial liability. Every row carrying one fewer fare than the competition on every flight for the life of the airplane. The airlines that did buy the Convair jets, TWA and Delta, and a scattering of carriers from Switzerland to Japan to Hong Kong, flew them well enough, and passengers who rode them remembered the speed, but there were never enough buyers to come close to recovering what the program had cost to create. The 880 and the 990 are, by the measure Convair cared about, magnificent. They are the fastest first-generation jetliners ever to fly in commercial service. And that achievement is precisely as valuable as the market's indifference to it, which is to say, not valuable at all. Convair exits the commercial airliner business and never returns to it. The engineering culture that had built the Catalina and the Liberator and the Atlas, the culture that believed the supremely capable machine was always the right machine, had finally met a market that did not care how good the airplane was, only how much it cost to run, and the collision very nearly destroyed the entire corporation. The founding principal had asked the wrong question at the worst possible moment, and the answer it produced was the largest pile of lost money anyone in American industry had ever assembled. What follows the catastrophe is not a sudden death, but a long, quiet diminishment. The slow fate of a company that has lost its reason to lead and settles into building pieces of other people's machines. Convair survives because General Dynamics survives, and the division still has its military and space work, the descendants of the Delta Wing fighters and the Atlas rocket. The Atlas in particular has a long and honorable afterlife, evolving into the Atlas Centaur, one of the most reliable launch vehicles America ever built, lofting satellites and deep space probes for decades, its lineage continuing in some form into the 21st century. But the proud, independent engineering company that designed whole airplanes around its own convictions is gone. Convair becomes increasingly a subcontractor. The manufacturing capability built up for the doomed 880 and 990, the tooling and the skilled hands and the giant San Diego plant finds its use not in building Convair's own airliners, but in building fuselages for other manufacturers, structures designed by other companies to other companies' specifications. The division that had once asked whether the machine was the best in the sky now asks only whether it can build to print on schedule at the agreed price. It is competent work, even valuable work, but it is the work of a supplier, not a creator. And the distinction is the whole distinction between what Convair had been and what it had become. A company that had once asked what the best airplane in the world would look like and then built it, now asked what a customer's drawing specified and then matched them. The engineers who had pioneered the Delta Wing and the stainless steel rocket grew old or moved on, and the institutional ambition that had defined the place for 40 years slowly drained away, replaced by the steadier, smaller rhythm of contract manufacturing. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the division builds fuselage sections and rocket stages, a contractor inside a conglomerate, its name fading from the public mind even as its products fly inside the airplanes and rockets of others. And then the Cold War ends, and the defense industry that had sustained General Dynamics for 40 years contracts violently, and the conglomerate decides to dismantle itself, to sell its divisions and return the cash to shareholders, the purest expression of a logic that treats a company not as a builder of things, but as a portfolio of assets to be optimized and liquidated. The Convair pieces are sold off one by one. The tactical missile business goes to Hughes Aircraft in 1992. The Space Systems Division, the heir to the Atlas, is sold to Martin Marietta, soon to become part of Lockheed Martin in 1993. The remaining Convair operations, by then primarily building fuselages for the McDonnell Douglas MD-11, are sold to McDonnell Douglas in 1994. And in 1996, General Dynamics deactivates the last remaining legal entities of the Convair division, and the name that had meant San Diego aviation for 60 years simply ceases to exist on paper. The final administrative signature on a death that had really begun in a Fortune magazine in 1962. What remains today is mostly absence. The great plant at Lindbergh Field, where the Catalinas and Liberators were born, is demolished. A rental car facility for the San Diego airport stands on the ground. The Kearney Mesa complex, where General Dynamics built fighters and rockets, is torn down between 1994 and 1996, and homes and offices occupy the site. The defense contractor that once employed 18,000 people in San Diego now employs, in San Diego, 0, and the city's long tradition of building aircraft, a tradition that reached back to the dawn of flight and Glenn Curtiss and the first seaplanes lifting off the bay, ends completely. The Atlas lineage flies on under other owners, the most enduring physical legacy of Convair's engineering. Rockets still rising from Cape Canaveral that trace their ancestry to the stainless steel balloon the company built in the 1950s. The Atlas Centaur and its descendants carrying satellites and probes long after the division that conceived them had been struck from the corporate registers. It is a strange kind of immortality, the machine outliving the maker, the rocket still climbing while the company that drew it has become a name in a museum and a few lines in an aviation history. The 18,000 jobs are gone. The feeder shops that once supplied the plant are gone. An entire regional industry, an entire way that a city understood itself, simply stopped. Reuben Fleet, the founder, had died in 1975, an old man honored as an aviation pioneer, his name preserved in San Diego on the Science Center and Space Theater his family endowed, a building full of children learning about flight a few miles from where his company built it. The Reuben H. Fleet Science Center in Balboa Park, one of the first institutions in the country to pair interactive science exhibits with a planetarium and a giant screen theater. It is a generous and fitting memorial. And it is also, in a way the founder might not have intended, a museum of a thing that no longer exists, the San Diego that built airplanes. He had sold his stake in 1941 and did not live to see the division shut down, but he lived long enough to watch the 880 and the 990 lose their fortune, to watch the company he built bet itself on speed and very nearly die of it. The slogan he had stamped into the plants, "Nothing short of right is right," had been a statement of pride and a discipline of excellence, and it had built some of the finest aircraft in American history. But it carried inside it an assumption that the world did not always share. The assumption that the most excellent machine, the most capable, the fastest, the most technically perfect, was by definition the right one. The men who inherited Fleet's company kept the conviction and never updated the question. They asked whether the 880 was the best airplane, the fastest airplane, the most impressive feat of engineering, and the answer was yes. And they built it. And the market asked a different question entirely. The market asked what it cost to fly a passenger from New York to Los Angeles. And to that question, the magnificent, record-breaking Convair jets had no acceptable answer. Reuben Fleet built his company on the conviction that an aircraft must be supremely, uncompromisingly good, that nothing short of right is right. And for 40 years, that conviction produced machines of genuine greatness: the seaplane that patrolled the oceans, the bomber that helped win a world war, the intercontinental rocket that carried the first Americans toward the edge of space. The principle was specific, and it was demanding, and it was, in its proper domain, magnificent. In the world of military procurement and space exploration, where the customer is a government that wants the most capable machine that can possibly be built and will pay what capability costs, the question is the best is exactly the right question. And Convair answered it better than almost anyone alive. But the founding principle contained a hidden assumption that the men who inherited it never learned to examine, the assumption that best and right are the same word, that the most technically excellent machine is always the one worth building. In the commercial airliner market, that assumption was fatal, because an airline does not want the best airplane. It wants the most profitable one, the one that carries the most passengers at the lowest cost per seat. And the question that governs that market is not, is it the fastest, but can the customer make money flying it? Convair never asked the second question. It built the fastest jetliner in the world and discovered that the world would rather fly something slower and cheaper. And it compounded the error by building an even faster jetliner to fix the first one. And it lost more money than any company had ever lost on a single product. And it nearly took one of the largest corporations in America down with it. The men who came after kept Fleet's answer and forgot to ask whether it still fit the question. They poured the company's engineering genius into being best at a contest the customer was no longer scoring. And when the bill came due, they retreated into building other companies' designs, and then the conglomerate that owned them, asking the only question conglomerates ever truly ask, which is, what are these assets worth in cash? Sold the pieces and switched off the name. The plants are parking lots and apartment blocks now. The great sheds where the Liberators and the Delta Wing fighters took shape, erased from the San Diego landscape between 1994 and 1996. The rockets still fly under other flags, the Atlas bloodline outliving by decades the company that fathered it. Convair was built on the belief that the best machine is the right machine. And for 2 generations in the skies over the oceans and on the pads at Cape Canaveral, that belief was vindicated again and again, right up until the company carried it into a market that had quietly stopped asking which airplane was the best and started asking only which one it could afford. And on that question, the fastest jetliner ever built turned out to be worth less than nothing at all.